Cancer is the big bad wolf in medicine, and we're all scared of it, and we may not know when it's going to come to get us, and we think it's genetics and bad luck that ultimately cause cancer. But I've put together this video series about cancer to help you feel more in charge of the risk of cancer, prevent cancer, learn about the causes of cancer, how to treat cancer, and so much more about cancer to hopefully take the fear out of it and give you control. Just the fear alone is a cause of cancer. So we're going to try to undo that, and I'm going to help dispel some of the myths about cancer in order to help you feel more in control. So this first video is a course I've put together. The first video is on the causes of cancer. So I want to dive right in. Before you go any further, you might want to watch one of my first videos that wasn't necessarily a part of this series or this course, but I'll go through my treatment diagram of cancer. It's a broad overview of cancer, and it's a good way to get just a 10,000 foot overview of the forest before you dive into the weeds. So go and watch that video first, get an overview, and then let's dive in to go here. So first, the outline of this course series, we're going to start with the causes of cancer, then we're going to go over the prevention of cancer, the tests for cancer, the treatment of cancer, and then what do you do once you're in remission, because you're not done. For this video, we're only going to be talking about the causes of cancer. So let's dive right into one of the first myths. The first myth is that, oh, my parents had cancer, or my mom, or my grandma, or my aunt had cancer, thus I'm going to get cancer, or that's why I have my cancer. Now, although genetics do play a role in cancer, it's actually more your environment that causes the cancer. So if your mother had an environmental trigger that caused her cancer, you were born to that same mother, you lived in that same house as that mother, you ate the same foods as that mother for much of your life. So yes, you might get the same cancer because of those same triggers, but it's not genetic. So most people believe that genetics are the cause. It's showing 10 to 15% might be hereditary, 5 to 15% might be familial, but majority of them are sporadic, which means they happened and there's no trigger, or we know the trigger in functional medicine, but I mean there's no genetic trigger, there's no link to the family. Here's another article that I found on cancer.gov, which is not functional medicine. It is very conventional. And so let's see what they say. Inherited genetic mutations play a major role in about 5 to 10% of all cancers. Now, of course, there are some cancers that are very hormone driven or very genetics driven, and so the numbers may skew. But across the board, all cancer, only 5 to 10% are cancers. So most people know about the BRCA gene by now. The Angelina Jolie made it popular and all that. And so people are focused on these genes that are causing cancer. That's not the problem, guys. 90 to 95% are caused by the other triggers. What are those causes? Glad you asked. Let's get right into it. So the basic to all cancer boils down to too much damage to your DNA, because that's ultimately what causes cancer. As DNA gets damaged and your on switches make the cell invincible, and it just keeps dividing and eating and gobbling tissue, so now you have cancer. The other ones are where the off switches are turned off, where the cancer cell no longer has a mechanism that says, hey, I've grown too much, or I've outgrown my food supply, so I just need to die. I need to commit cell suicide. That off switch is gone, so now the cell proliferates and grows rapidly and destroys tissue, and you have cancer. Both of those are DNA damages. Once that DNA damage is done and that mutation happens, now you have a genetic cancer, but it's not because of your genetics. It was the genetic damage that caused it. So it all boils down to you either have too much damage going on to the DNA or too little healing. So one simple way to look at it is if you go out in the sun and you spend too much time in the sun, well, that's too much damage. You're going to get a sunburn. Your skin is going to get red. No matter how many antioxidants you take, how many carrots you eat, how much kale you eat, if you're exposed to the sun too much, then you're going to get sunburned. Now, if you have more antioxidants and things, you may not get as sunburned as someone else, but you will still override your damage at some point. So this diagram is real simple. It's showing all these sources up above that cause the DNA damage, and you don't need to get into the specifics right now, but they cause that DNA damage. As that DNA damage happens, these repair mechanisms can't fix it in time, and ultimately, if you don't have enough repair mechanisms, that's how you develop cancer. You get all kinds of reactive oxygen species, which is just a fancy way of saying oxidative damage. All that damage gets overrun or overruns the DNA repair. And once it can't repair itself, errors start happening. And all it takes is one error to make a cancer. Okay? So, what are the triggers of cancer? As far as functional medicine concerned, I like to boil it down to these main causes. And so you can see one side of the diagram is blocked out. We're going to start with the gut issues. And if you haven't watched any of my other videos, I always use the palm of my hand as a metaphor. So we're not going to go into grave detail there, but we're going to talk about the causes of cancer. The number one cause of all disease, in my opinion, starts with the gut. Whether that be inappropriate digestion, meaning not enough digestion, or maybe means bad food coming in, inflammatory food coming in. Maybe the food isn't coming out, you're not pooping enough. Maybe the pooping too much. Inflammation in the gut, whether it be bacterial overgrowth or yeast overgrowth, whatever it may be, something going on in the gut means you're not getting the nutrition you need and you're not getting the trash out, which is your detox mechanism, and so it starts building up in the system, and that is a link to cancer. It's well known that people with chronic colon inflammation, like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, some sort of autoimmune attack on their colon, they have higher rates of cancer. Why do they have higher rates of cancer? Because they have more inflammation in that area. Chronic inflammation anywhere will cause cancer in that place. So gut issues is one of the main ways that causes cancer. Plus the gut helps with the other issues. So let's get to the other issues. The other issues are the toxic burdens. So the toxic burdens are listed here: biological toxins, mold toxins, environmental chemicals, heavy metals, and emotional toxins. We'll get into the individuals. I'm just listing them right now. But one of the things I want to point out is that there is a issue versus gut versus the toxins. So the issue here is that a lot of people like to focus on detox. It's kind of famous. You can detox, and here's this drink you can buy and these supplements you can take to detox. But too many people skip the gut. Your gut is your portal to your nutrition. You can eat the best diet in the world, but if you don't digest it, if you don't absorb it, it just becomes the best poop in the world. If you take expensive supplements, that's wonderful, but if you can't absorb those supplements, if those supplements can't do what it needs to, it just becomes expensive poop. So you cannot detox if the gut is broken. So first you must fix the gut before you can adequately detox. The only way to detox while having a broken gut is to do vitamin infusions, because you're bypassing the gut. Now that's not safe to say. You do detox even when your gut is broken, but just not efficiently, not adequately, certainly not enough, especially if you have cancer. I want to refer to your toxic burden as the witch's brew, the cancer brew, because chances are you don't just have a smoking gun of, oh, I'm only a mold patient, or I'm only a heavy metals patient, or I'm only a trauma patient, mental, emotional trauma. You're usually a witch's brew of each of them. So the worst offenders of this toxic burden is the top three that I've listed there. The worst offenders are what's known as mycotoxins, environmental chemicals, and heavy metals. We're going to dive into each one of those worst offenders, then we're going to go into the lesser offenders. But remember, even though these are the worst offenders, you must have an intact gut in order to detoxify these worst offenders. So don't skip ahead just because I called these the worst offenders. Right now, we're talking about the causes of cancer, so we're going to talk about the worst offenders first, not the order of treatment. So first and foremost is mycotoxins. Mycotoxins is a fancy way of saying mold, but there's a very important distinction. Mold is different from mycotoxins. So this picture you see here in the diagram is a living, growing mold. Mold is an organism that grows and releases mycotoxins. Most people think of mold and mold spores. So mold is here, mold is on your bread, mold is on the water damaged wall, whatever it may be. That's the mold you can see. That mold is releasing two main things: spores, which are tiny little seeds of itself to spread elsewhere. And yes, those can cause asthma and allergies and all kinds of stuff, but they normally don't really make you that sick. They can land inside you and you can grow the mold, and that can certainly make you sick also. But the main thing that molds do, toxic molds, release mycotoxins. Myco just means mold. Toxin means toxin. Everybody knows that. So the big difference between mold and mycotoxins is that mycotoxins are gases. They're chemicals. And so I know you don't really care about the chemical structure of mycotoxins. I don't really care about it. But what I need you to know when you see the difference between these diagrams is mycotoxins are tiny little molecules. They're gas in the air. A mold like this is not going to be found floating in the air freely. Its tiny little spores can be found in the air, but the real problem is mold makes gases and chemicals called mycotoxins. The reason those are so much more dangerous than the spores and the living growing mold is because those spores get mopped up by your sinuses, they get mopped up by your lungs. Yes, you can grow them in your lungs, sinuses, and even your gut. You can grow the molds, but the mycotoxins you can breathe infinitely, just like smoking a cigarette. You smoke enough cigarettes, all those toxins and chemicals, those burnt organic materials end up in your cells, they end up in your DNA, they end up in your brain and your tissue, and they cause problems. So mycotoxins are a particularly known trigger of cancer. Next, mold was one of my number ones, but next is environmental chemicals. I'd say more attention is drawn to environmental chemicals in functional medicine and in the cancer world, and there's no way to know which one is worse. I think mold is worse because it's so much more pervasive and silent, and not many people know how to adequately treat it. But environmental chemicals are certainly high up there, and it's one of the reasons why cancer is on an exponential rise in America and across the world, because our environmental chemicals are becoming not only more and more types, but more and more abundant. The McDonald's fast food of today is abundantly more toxic than the McDonald's when it first was created in a single mom and pop shop. Now that transports all over the world, you have to have chemicals in your food in order to make it last all the way around and taste as good as it does. So environmental chemicals are considered man-made chemicals. So let's go through some of them. Now, these are obviously toxic pictures that look dangerous with chemicals in factories and this tractor spraying stuff on the crops and this man wearing a gas mask and spraying crops. These people spraying the crops. So obviously those are the chemicals that everyone thinks about when they're environmental chemicals. But we're so far from our food supply, we're so far from the production of the products that we use every day that we don't see this stuff. But it's everywhere, whether you like it or not. There are movies making this stuff famous. So take the Aaron Brockovich story, for example. It's about contaminated water causing illness from Pacific Gas and Water. Although it's a great movie, it was a real-life story. Aaron Brockovich is a real person with a real story. Look it up. Another one was this Dark Waters in 2019 by DuPont Chemical Company. There were chemicals in the water, and this was a very real story of chemicals in the water causing human illness. So whether you like it or not, environmental chemicals are everywhere, and I've got a whole course on detoxification and looking at the chemicals in the environment. So be careful, learn where all those are, and learn how you can avoid them, because it's much easier to avoid those toxins than it is to detoxify those toxins. So the four main places I like to break down environmental chemicals to look is air, food, water, and products. So the air you breathe can be full of chemicals, like your couch can be full of flame retardants. Those flame retardants get into the air. Your food, of course, if you're not buying organic foods, then it's more likely it's toxic, especially fast food type stuff. Your water, filter your own water, guys. Don't believe anyone when you buy bottled water. Bottled water is not necessarily safe unless you bottled it yourself. And of course, products, I specifically like to highlight cosmetics, because it doesn't matter what you put on your body or how you put it on your body, the products you use can absolutely have chemicals and toxins in them. So avoiding environmental chemicals, I've kind of said some of this already. Drink filtered water, eat organic food, use air filters, and buy clean products. And of course, watch my detox course if you want to learn more about those environmental chemicals and how to avoid them, as well as detoxify. So next, worst offender, we're going to talk about heavy metals, lead, mercury, arsenic, that kind of stuff. And so where are heavy metals found? This is alarming. This is a very true study. 168 baby foods were tested. 95% of them were found to have lead, 75% cadmium, 73% arsenic, and 32% mercury. Guys, if our baby food has heavy metals in it, what do you think the other foods have in them that you don't even know because it was never tested? Our food supply is absolutely tainted with chemicals and heavy metals, whether we like to admit it or not. It's there. There just aren't that many studies to prove it. We see patients all the time. We test their heavy metals and their chemicals, and they're absolutely overloaded with one or both. And they come to us asking, well, where did I get this? And the truth is, we can't really tell you where you got it, but all we can tell you is that you need to start cleaning up your food, your products, your air, your water, so that you decrease your exposure, and then we can adequately get it out of you. But it's much harder to detox than it is to avoid the retox, avoid getting more, and it's easier to detoxify. I guess that's all I want to say about heavy metals. Let's not forget that biological toxins create a toxic burden as well. So, what are these biological toxins? Think anything that's bacteria, anything that's fungi like candida or mold, think Lyme, anything that's living, growing, making biological toxins is considered a biological toxin. So, I like to specifically differentiate that because when we talk about toxins and chemicals, we always think, oh, big bad chemical plants, oh, big bad fast food and big pharma and all those things. But we can't forget that these microbes that live inside us, live in our sinuses, live in our gut, live all over us, they're making biological toxins that can be worse than the environmental chemicals out there. So you have to make sure you have the right population, the right healthy bacteria, the right healthy fungi, and make sure you're treating the gut, treating your sinuses, preventing those chronic bacterial overgrowths or infections that may be causing issues like dental issues and whatnot can cause inflammation and toxicity. Last but not least is the emotional toxins. So emotional toxins, think anything that causes mental stress. And I mean anything. You can love your kids to death, but if they stress you out, that can literally be a cause for cancer. So having the right balance of mental stress, perception of stress, gratitude, and all of those things to reduce your emotional stress absolutely reduces your emotional trauma, emotional toxic bucket, and reduces your witch's brew. So trauma is a common one that people can block out and forget about, but you might need to go see a therapist. Might be time to bring that trauma up, discuss it, process it, forgive yourself, forgive that person, whatever it may be, and move past that trauma because it can haunt you from the inside and cause cancer. Of course, poor sleep causes stress. Now it's a double-edged sword or a chicken and the egg. Poor sleep causes stress and stress causes poor sleep. So fixing both can sometimes be hard and you need to use supplements or prescriptions to help break that cycle. And then of course, just being sedentary. Now today's day, sitting is the new smoking, they say. So being too sedentary can cause emotional stress to your body and biochemical stress and cause cancer. So think of cancer as the witch's brew, not any one thing. Oh, it's not just the cigarettes I smoked. A common study I like to bring up is we all know asbestos causes cancer, but what you don't know is when you when you smoke cigarettes and get exposed to asbestos, your risks are multiplied by each other. Don't quote me on the numbers, but it's something like lung cancer risk with asbestos is 5 times the general population. Smoking cigarettes is 10 times the general population. If you smoke and are exposed to asbestos, it's 50 times the general population. So risks multiply each other. Exposures and toxic burdens multiply each other, which is why this cancer brew is so important. When you have cancer or if you're trying to prevent cancer, you need to treat all of these because all of them multiply each other. So now that we've talked all about the causes of cancer, you're probably wondering how I prevent cancer. So number one is I will be talking about this video in detail. There will be another video in this series. But the first step is prevention. Prevention is key. So if you can reduce the triggers, then of course you're going to prevent the cancer from happening. How do I prevent the cancer? Well, if you become a patient, we can test all these things. We can treat all things to make sure that you are reducing your risks of cancer and giving you a fighting chance if you do have cancer. I've got more videos on YouTube, so check those out. And then of course I've got online courses. So check out my gut course, check out my mold course, whatever your smoking guns are, or whatever you've worried you've been exposed to, then start there. Do the course, do it yourself if you can't become a patient. So last but not least, do not let cancer scare you because that itself is an emotional toxin and a trigger for cancer. So be empowered for cancer. Don't believe it's just genetics and you're either going to get it or you're not. Take steps every day. Every time you eat food, every time you make a decision, you're voting towards health or you're voting towards dis-ease. So choose health, eat healthy, avoid toxins. And of course, watch the next video in the series. Hope this was helpful, guys.